Hello guys, welcome back to the College Cinephile. I'm Raven Nelson here, and we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Christopher Bell of University Colorado, Colorado Springs.
Hi.
Hello, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So just to start off, can you give us a brief introduction of what you do?
I am the Director of Graduate Studies and an Associate Professor of Media Studies in the Department of Communication at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And I teach classes in rhetoric and in media studies, focusing mostly on children's media and gender. I also do sort of race and class and some other stuff, but most of my work is in gender.
So what got you interested in this topic?
I've always been sort of working in media since I was an undergraduate, really. My undergraduate degree is in history, and I spent a lot of time studying propaganda and that kind of stuff. And then I went to film school for my master's degree. And in my master's degree, I really focused on screenwriting, writing children's media. And then my PhD is also in children's media. So I don't know, I've always liked cartoons and kid stuff, and I think my whole career sort of spiraled out of that.
Okay, so speaking of children's media, what do you think, why do you think it's important?
So the primary way that our children learn things, despite what anyone wants to tell you, the primary way that our children in contemporary U.S. society learn things is through the media that they consume. Parents, try to teach their children, obviously, school, church, whatever, but at the end of the day, the toys a kid plays with, the books that they read, the movies they watch, the television shows they watch, those are the things that really drive how they see the world and how they sort of formulate their thoughts. And so what's in that media matters an awful lot. People like to discount the amount of influence that stuff has, or try to run away from it. Oh, well, we just won't let our kid watch television, or we just won't buy them commercial toys or whatever. But at the end of the day, kids have to interact with other kids. And so, whether you want your child to know about, a particular media thing or not, the other kids at school are going to bring it up. And so, much like any other thing, if you had a swimming pool, you could put a fence around that swimming pool. But if the kid climbs over the fence, the kid's going to drown. I would rather teach my kid how to swim. And so that's the way I sort of approach children's media. We can pretend that it has no influence, or we can actually deal with it and try to better prepare our children and make them more media literate. And so that's really where my work focuses.
Do you think your approach to any of that, or how you viewed that, was affected when you had a kid of your own?
Oh, absolutely. Again, I've always been sort of involved in children's media stuff, but it really wasn't until, I had my daughter that I really began to think this seriously about the influences of media on our children. Before, I was just interested in making good stuff for kids. Now it's definitely much more focused, it's much more purposeful now that I'm a parent.
In what way?
Well, just in the way that I have this little 11-year-old now thing in my house that's sort of this mobile research laboratory. I literally am watching things play out with her in real time, in a way that used to just be theoretical. I want to see the influence of the Disney Channel on kids. I could sit in the living room with my daughter and 3 of her friends and watch what happens, So I think the sort of influence now is direct in a way that it was sort of just theory before. So.
And what about do you think adult representation is also important?
I do. I just care less about grown-ups than I do about kids. But yeah, I mean, certainly. And I do spend some time dealing in adult media as well. I've done a lot of research around video games and other sort of adult consumptive practices. Like I said, I just don't care that much. Not nearly as much about what's going on with grown-ups as what's going on with kids.
So it obviously doesn't have the same impact, but are there different types of representation that you think impact adults more than children?
Oh, well, sure, because in theory, adults are consuming different kinds of programming or different kinds of films or whatever. A lot of my work with kid stuff is in material culture, toys and that kind of stuff, whereas I don't really get that with adults. And so when I'm dealing in adult media consumptive practices, I'm really looking more at representations of race and gender and sort of how those things affect the perpetuation of pedagogy, but the perpetuation of a thing that's already there because it's been developing since they were kids. So even when I'm dealing with adults, I'm still dealing in the influences of children's media. I'm just dealing with the outcome of that as opposed to the development of it.
Do you think representation in media can change like adults' minds? For example, for some background, Dr. Bell here came to one of my classes yesterday and showed us a clip from Leave It to Beaver, which was essentially women stay in the kitchen and men were going to do all the work, that kind of thing.
Right.
So for people who grew up in that era and were fed that kind of really strict gender role, do you think that it's maybe too late for them, or do you think media can still influence and change these people's minds?
I think it can, but to a much lesser extent. I think there are diminishing returns with age, which is why I spend the majority of my time trying to make college students and high school students and middle school students, because I do a lot of work with those two populations as well, where I'm trying to make them media literate rather than focusing on adult media consumption. I can still fix you. I can't necessarily fix a 6-year-old person. So I focus my energy where I think I'll have the most influence. And honestly, that's with people who are still in school, still learning, still trying to figure it out, still in a mindset where new information can be processed, can be positively applied, can change outcomes, which is sort of a pessimistic view, I suppose, of adult society, but it's the way that I think. I would much rather spend my time influencing people whose minds are still open than banging my head against a wall for someone who thinks they know the answer already.
So what's the outcome that you're hoping for when you teach these kids?
A better future, honestly. A better you. A better these guys back here. A better everything, If I can make you better media producers, when you get to be in charge of making media, you will make better media. That in turn will inculcate an entire new generation of people to look at media representation differently. And then those people will have a different worldview, and then we will move society forward. And that new generation will be taught things that are different than now, and we'll move the society forward. We're already seeing it. For whatever the weirdness is of the current political environment, I think what it is really demonstrating is that there are two very different worldviews going on in our planet right now, skewed very much along age lines. And I think generationally, more and more people are looking at the world differently. Those people will make different media. You will make different media. And we will change the way people look at the world through that media. So I actually weirdly think, as ugly as the current political environment is, I think it's positive in the long run for all of us, because I think we're seeing the death throes of a particular worldview that once it dies off, it will be gone forever. So, and that will be a much more exciting media environment for all of us.
What do you think in the next 20 years or so, when us millennials grow up and enter the real world, what do you think that media environment would look like?
Well, number one, I think you're in the real world now. I think that's a phrase that people who are no longer in college use to forget that the world doesn't get much more real than a college student's life. It's pretty real. But I think that when your generation, by the time your generation is in charge of things, my generation will have made it a much easier, safer, and better place for you. And you, in turn, will make it a much easier, better, and safer place for my kid, who is only 11, right? So that's about the gap between you and me and between you and her. So I really think that in the future, going forward, we will live in a world that's very much like fluoride in the water. Whereas fluoride in the water now, it's always been there my whole life, it's always been there your whole life. We don't even notice it anymore. We just have better teeth. This is going to be the same thing. We will have done the legwork such that we won't have to talk about whether or not our society is feminist. It will just be feminist. It's the way that it works. We won't have to talk about whether or not we care about people who are not American. We just will. We won't have to talk about positive race relations because we won't even remember what negative race relations used to look like. I think this society, the world is getting smaller, it's not getting larger. Increases in transportation effectiveness, increases in technology, bringing costs down to travel, bringing the world closer together every day. The reality for people who live in our time is you don't have a choice but to interact with people who are not like you, in a way that previous generations had a choice to wall themselves off. Your generation, my generation, we don't build walls. We build planes and we go places, you know? And I think that will absolutely influence the way we move forward as a culture, as a people. We will be in a time where your neighbors don't look like you and nobody cares. And I really firmly, I wouldn't show up for work tomorrow if I didn't think that was the truth.
How do you keep so sure that that is the truth? Because sometimes it looks more bleak than that.
Sometimes it does look more bleak, but whenever it looks really bleak, I always remember we're not in charge yet. We're not in charge yet, you know? Every advancement in the history of the world, every advancement in the history of civilization has happened because the people who were maintaining a certain worldview left. That's the bottom line, you know? And the world progresses. It always has. The nature of society, the nature of mankind, humankind, is not to regress. The nature of humankind is to move forward. That's what keeps me showing up every day. That we will survive this. We will survive all that. There's terrible stuff happening right now in this country. There's terrible stuff happening right now in the world. We will survive it. Humanity will survive it, and it will move forward. You know.
That's a rather uplifting view to
Well,
end on.
that's sort of the way that I think about it. You know, every time a horrible thing happens, part of me thinks there's a good chance this is the last time this ever happens. So that's sort of what keeps me getting up in the morning.
Well, we need people like you to get up in the morning and remind us of that.
Well, thanks.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Dr. Bell.
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, this is really fun.
All right, so thank you all for watching Dr. Bell's interview here. If you want to see more of stuff like this, like and subscribe in the link below, and we'll see you next time on the College Cinephile.